New blog 10. I had always thirsted so, even as a girl, to know the source of life and death and love, everything. What else was there to thirst for? I had never let go of my hopes for this, and the master who could take me there. And how was I to ask him? To ask him for his kindness? What had Granny Beth said? I would find the giver of great kindness. Then I must make the most of my opportunity, Hecate had told me. I thought, not for the first time, I might be starting to understand. I reached the area of town where Simon the Pharisee lived, and it felt almost as if it was a dream. No one had invited me to this feast. I had not expected to be, but somehow I had to try to fulfill my quest. Getting past the servants into the feast hall wouldn't pose a big problem. The role of priestess had equipped me for this much at least, with a bearing that was difficult to turn aside. But what I had forgotten till that moment was how it felt to enter a house where the master was. It had a kind of aura that lifted my soul within me with hushed breath. The ideas running through my head abandoned me, and I stopped trying to figure it out, just pushed forward into the aura of specialness. Carrying my little box, I told the servants at the door that I was to go to the master of the feast. They didn't question the air of my authority, but to me it had become more a heartfelt plea than any kind of command. Luckily it didn't make any difference. They let me through just the same. The feasting hall stretched out on both sides of the door, with lots of men sitting there at a long table. To the left was an arch through to where a table of women were eating. I caught the eye of Mother Mary. She smiled slightly, though other faces there seemed slightly horrified. She had known me, I knew. Others I thought probably hadn't. I sought for Yeshua down the men's hall. Some faces were familiar and others not. The familiar ones were his disciples, whilst the others were probably the great and powerful people that Simon had thought to introduce to him. They certainly looked intimidating, but then there was Yeshua at the end of the table, smiling gently. How could I have seen anyone else besides him? And next to him was a pleased-looking Simon, the host. Faces had turned to stare at me, but not in friendliness. Some were like high walls of intellectual might. Others were full of disdainful indifference. But the master was also there, and that was the only way I could go. The only way I'd ever wanted to go. But in this moment there was no other option anyway. Walking behind the rows of guests was like going down a hostile corridor. Yet I didn't care. It led to where I was going, to take my small gift, to give my heart. My breath took me there, where my legs were growing shaky. Finding myself at his feet, I remembered only that this is where I had found that peace, where unwanted thoughts and presences couldn't reach me. And seeing the kindness in his eyes, I had a sudden insight. By these feet he travelled the world to give people the chance to find what he himself already knew. He had the peace and love we sought, had them in abundance. Not for himself was he in mortal flesh. He had come for us. Overwhelmed in this understanding, and what I came for, I poured out my tears and thanks together. At his feet, onto his feet, I let it all flow out of me, and I washed the tears with my hair and cried the more for being able to. He let me stay. Others looked put out and made disapproving noises. He took no notice. I broke the seal on the alabaster box and poured ointment on the blessed feet. That my hair could spread this balm on them was the most any woman could have ever wished. Your sins are all washed away, he said. Yeshua turned to his host, explaining something about washing of hands and forgiveness of sins. I noticed Simon Peter among the faces of the nearby guests. Next to him was Thomas. I didn't think that Peter had recognized me, but I knew Thomas would have. This was the crux of my whole life. I had my chance with the Master now. As the conversation stilled, and he turned back towards me, I quietly asked my heartfelt question. May I receive the way to your inner truth? He looked at me, and all else dissolved away from me, except his face, his eyes. Yes, you may, you shall, he said. Go in peace. Be at peace.